There's a super interesting idea called the Goodhart's problem that actually talks about the dynamics between end goals or objectives and the measurements or targets we set towards seeing whether that objective was met, whether it's in disciplines like psychology, computer science, or even in everyday life. So in this video, we're going to talk about the Goodhart's problem and see how it can actually make us rethink the way we shape goals and different measurements towards it. Now, I think it's actually easier to kick it off with an example, and then we can actually define what the Goodhart's problem is. If we take schools as an example, we see that the end goal of schools is for students to understand. So this is the end goal, and then schools set different measurements or targets towards those goals, such as tests, for example. So what the Goodhart's problem stipulates is that with time, if we set that measurement, the measurement will decouple from the end goal. So we see that actualizing in schools where students actually try to memorize or cram before the test and then they get a good grade and that's it. The goal is not really met, but the measurement is met. So we see the detachment of these two things. So that's the core idea of the Goodhart's problem. So what it says is that sometimes when we set measurements towards end goals, the measurement will end up being optimized for on its own. There are endless examples of the Goodhart's problem happening in psychology, in politics, in computer science, and all these other disciplines. But I think it's also more relevant for us in everyday life as well. Because even in our day-to-day life, we actually set objectives or goals, and we also set measurements or targets towards them. So maybe one is trying to learn a certain topic, the end goal, and then they set the measurement or the target of reading as much articles or books as possible. Now, what the Goodhart's problem is telling us is that reading as much books as possible or reading as much articles as possible does not necessarily reflect understanding. So we have to always keep in mind the link between the two, which is the wisdom we can actually extrapolate from this whole Goodhart's problem when it comes to everyday life. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that this shouldn't be overemphasized, if that makes sense, because measurements are actually very useful when it comes to seeing whether we have met end goals or not. But what we're saying is that the link between the two should always be, we should be bearing it in mind, if that makes sense. Because as we said, the idea of decoupling is very much possible. So one practical message we can actually extract from this discussion is that sometimes we can subconsciously confuse the measure and the goal. So we need to actually clearly think about the measures and the goals we put forward, and then we think about whether they're aligned with each other or not. So with that, we conclude our brief video for today. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time.